Well, welcome, folks. Thanks for joining today. Just make sure a couple things. We are doing this as a meeting rather than a webinar, so you can unmute yourself. You can be on camera if you'd like to be. We are going to be recording this session, so we just ask that while we are presenting that you wait until we kind of open it up for Q&A to actually speak if you want to speak verbally. The chat box is completely open if you want to use that as well. And I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Shannon Abbott. She, hers, or they, them pronouns. I am the program manager here at Common Cause Michigan. No, I recognize some of you, but not all of you. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Our organization, Common Cause, I'm actually a part of like what I would consider our state chapter, but we are a national organization that's been around since 1970. We are dedicated to upholding the core values of American democracy and all of what that means. And that is obviously, a really big undertaking at this particular moment in time. Our team here in Michigan, we are a staff of two right now, myself and Quentin Turner, who is our state executive director. And we cover the entire state. We do focus more on statewide issues while partnering with our national team on federal and national issues. And we are staffed in more than half of the country. So we do a lot of different programming, everything from voting and elections work, fair representation, redistricting, all of that kind of stuff. We do voter education, just general democracy issue education, and a whole bunch more. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into that right now. In the new year, we will be having some get to know our organization webinars and events for you to learn a little bit about more about who we are. But in the meantime, I would love to introduce Nomi, who is on screen with us. Nomi is a fantastic partner of ours. We are in meetings many times a week together. Nomi Joyrich is the Michigan director for Jews for a Secular Democracy, and has been hosting these Know Before You Sign meetings across the state for quite a few months now with various partners and organizations, big and small, just to get people insights on what's happening with Michigan ballots. And so, Nomi, I'm going to stop talking. I'll let you do a little more of introducing yourself and we'll go from there.
Terrific. And I am just going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and introduce myself a little bit more. I also want to say that I will not be able to see any of the chat while I'm sharing my screen, but I will be stopping frequently for questions, or if there's something really burning, you can just go ahead and interrupt me. I am Nomi Joyrich. I am the Michigan Director for Jews for a Secular Democracy, and we are a national organization, and we are devoted to the protection of the separation between religion and government. That's what we do. I will also say that I'm going to be talking about all of the ballot initiatives that are either collecting signatures or are, in the process of trying to get their language approved, that kind of thing. There are a few ballot initiatives that our organization has an official stance on, and in the spirit of true transparency, I will let you know if there is a ballot initiative that we have a stance on. Any questions before I dive in?
I will just say I will do the same with Common Cause. There is only one that we have an official stance on right now, but there could be more to come. So stay tuned for that.
So there are three different kinds of ballot proposals, and all three of these are in play this cycle. So there are constitutional amendments, there are ballot initiatives to enact state law, and there is one referendum, which is to repeal a law. They all require a different number of signatures. I'm not going to go into the weeds of how many signatures they require, but they're all based on a percentage of the turnout from the last gubernatorial election. I'm just going to say really quickly a word that there are two other kinds of petitions that you might also see people collecting signatures for. Nominating petitions are to help get a candidate on the ballot. You don't need this for every single elected position, but quite a few of them, they require a certain number of signatures. The main thing you need to know about these is that you can sign as many as there are open seats. So, for example, let's say it's a school board race and there are two open seats, you can sign two petitions. Right now, there's one open Senate seat, so you can sign one petition. You have to live in the district of whatever candidate it is. So for Senate, that would be anywhere in Michigan you can sign. Let's say you're signing for your for a congressional seat, you have to live in that congressional district to sign the petition. And that is not one petition per party, that's one petition per however many seats are open. I do not believe there are any recall petitions that are going on right now. I'm not positive. This is a fairly rare thing, but we do see it occasionally. And these are petitions to try and recall somebody who has already been elected to office, and recall petitions would then, get it on the ballot to try and recall an elected official. We do see this in Michigan, although I have to say that it's not that common. Um, any questions before I move on?
I see a couple questions in the chat box here. One from Michelle. One, will we get a copy of your slide deck?
You will get I have a PDF that gives an overview of all of the petitions that I'm going to talk about, and you will get that.
Right. And I will say real quick too, because it says I'm taking notes from a nominee county Democratic Party from that individual. If you would like Nomi to host this with your organization, your team, your group, I know she has been
Yes,
extremely happy to do that with everybody. So feel
yes,
free to reach out. We'll get that information to you at the end.
yes,
Um,
absolutely. I'm available to do this presentation for any organization, church, house of worship. I can do it for partisan or nonpartisan organizations, even if it's just like your book club that you want me to come to.
yes.
Okay.
And then Simone asked, what happens if you've signed more than one nominating petition?
So that is an excellent question, and this is the same. So the answer is the same for all of the ballot petitions. You can only sign one time for any ballot petition as well. Campaigns should hopefully be checking their own petitions. So your candidate or your petition should be, inputting all of them. And if the campaign finds the duplicate, then they just cross off the duplicate and one signature counts. If the Board of State Canvassers finds the duplicate, then they cross off both names.
And you can sign as many petitions as you want. You can just sign them only one time each.
Yes. Thank you for
Um,
clarifying.
yes. And does anybody else have any questions before we move forward?
Okay, so one thing that I really want to stress and surprises a lot of people is that it is completely legal for circulators to not understand the petitions and to not honestly portray the petition. I could have a petition that I could be circulating and I could say, this is a petition that will give everybody a free trip to Disney World. Like I can just make anything up, and that is totally legal. The responsibility for understanding what is on the petition is 100% rests with the person signing it, which is why I'm doing these presentations to know before you sign so that everybody can really understand what it is before they're pressured to sign. Many circulators are paid based on how many signatures they get. So a lot of times people will pressure you to sign. Like we're hearing a lot of people saying that somebody is saying to them, please just sign it. It's cold and I need to buy a coat for my kid. And so there's a lot of pressure to sign these. There is legislation being introduced that would end this practice of paying per signature, but that is for the future that will not impact this current cycle. So for you, as somebody who isn't circulating, what you're allowed to do is you're allowed to stand near the circulator. You're allowed to talk to people who are potential signers and educate them. So you could stand next to me while I was circulating and say, this isn't really going to get you a free trip to Disney World. This is really going to do this other thing. You are allowed to read the petition. There's the 100-word summary is at the top of the petition. And then on the backside is the full, every single word of the petition. I will tell you that in all my years of political, very, very many, I have had exactly one person sit down and read the entire petition. But I absolutely encourage people to do that, to read it all. So, what happens if two competing proposals pass? So, for example, let's say there's a proposal that passes that says everybody has to wear yellow, and there's another proposal that says everybody has to wear blue. So, and they both pass and they cannot exist in the same world as each other. So, the Michigan Supreme Court will evaluate this and determine which parts of these proposals can stand at the same time. Like, for example, what if it's blue and yellow stripes? Maybe there's parts of it that can stand together. But wherever there's a conflict, the proposal that has the higher vote total prevails. Now, obviously, these proposals are a lot more complicated than what color your shirt is, so it's not always so cut and dry which parts of it can stand at the same time. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to move on to voting. And I will say before I explain what the proposals will do, I want to review what the status quo is. So these are some of the current laws about voting in Michigan. So in Michigan, you're allowed to register to vote online, through the mail, in person. You've probably seen a lot of voter registration drives, people registering you to vote at art fairs, things like that. That's legal. There are many different ways that you can prove your residency when you're registering to vote. It doesn't have to be an official government document. It can be like your lease, your utility bill, lots of different ways. If you go to vote, and they will ask you for your photo ID, but if you don't have it with you, you can sign a piece of paper called an affidavit that swears to your identity and your residency. When you sign that, that has the same legal status as if you're in court and you're taking an oath. So if you lie about that, then that's perjury and there's a criminal offense to that. It is a felony offense for non-citizens to attempt to vote, and violators can be subject to prison, fines, or deportation. Now, there are some municipalities that allow non-citizen residents to vote in local elections. Like in some cities, you might be able to vote in for school board or for city council, but non-citizen voting is not allowed in any state in the United States or in any federal election. Approximately 0.00028% of ballots cast in Michigan are done by people who don't have the right to vote. But not all of those are non-citizens. Some of those are like, I moved here from Ohio 2 weeks ago and I didn't know that I wasn't living here long enough. Things like that would also be in, or, I pre-registered my birthday. I'm going to turn 18 the day after the election, so I thought I was allowed to vote. All of things like that are all included in that number. So before I go delve into this petition, I do want to say that as an organization, Jews for a Secular Democracy, part of our mission is to protect democracy itself. We do have an official position on this. We see this as an attack on democracy, and we do oppose this petition. But I'm going to just tell you what it does, and you can decide for yourself.
I will jump in real quick and say Common Cause, this is the only thing that we currently have position on as well right now. And this, so if you have any further questions about how to get involved or anything in this, please feel free to reach out to either of us.
So there are two different ballot petitions that have had language approved by the Board of State Canvassers. And the first one is called the Committee to Protect Voters' Rights, which goes by Prove It Michigan. They are not collecting signatures. They are supporting the effort of Americans for Citizens Voting, which is actively collecting signatures. And because they are not collecting signatures and we do not expect them to start, I'm not going to spend very much time talking about it. There's these two petitions are very similar. There are some differences, and if you want to know more about the differences, you can certainly reach out to me and I can explain those differences, but it's not going to be something that I really focus on. Both of them are constitutional amendments that require something that we refer to as DPOC, documentary proof of citizenship. So DPOC is the most common form of DPOC is a US passport, which must be valid, not expired US passport. If you have a valid US passport, then you can prove your citizenship and you don't need any additional documents. If you do not have a valid US passport, then you need to have an official birth certificate. That's not a photocopy of one, it's an official birth certificate with the seal on it. And also valid photo ID that has a matching name. If you have changed your name at any time since you were born, then you need a third document, which is something that will prove your legal name change. Now, a lot of people, this is confusing to a lot of people, especially because there's been such a big push for everybody to get their real ID. It's important to know that your real ID, your driver's license, your state ID, none of those things prove your citizenship. Non-citizen residents are also eligible for real ID. So all of the documents that are in the box with the orange, these will not be sufficient to prove citizenship if this passes. Only the ones in the pink. So Prove It Michigan, as I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I just want you to know that that is a grassroots Michigan effort that is promoted by Representative Dick Pottsmas. Americans for Citizens Voting is promoted by a national organization, and it is introducing basically this exact same proposal in many different states, pretty much all of the swing states. This will affect every single voter, whether you have been voting for the past 50 years or whether you are registering to vote tomorrow, it will impact you. So I will give more details about that in a bit. So the Americans for Citizens Voting would require DPOC, documentary proof of citizenship, for every voter. People who are already registered to vote will have to go to your clerk in person to prove your citizenship at some point prior to the election. And
Mhm.
I think the deadline is something like 3 or 4 days prior to the election. By then, you will have had to go in person to prove your citizenship. And if you are registering for the first time or you're updating your registration, let's say you move or you change your name or something like that, and you need to update your registration, you will again have to show your documentary proof of citizenship. So this is not just for new voters, this is for everybody. It would also require that when you return your absentee ballot, that you will have to include either a photocopy of your ID or the last 4 digits of your social security number.
Oh my.
This would require your current photo ID when you're casting a ballot. So that piece of paper that I explained, the affidavit, the right to have that would be gone. You have to have your ID. So if you show up to vote and you don't have your ID, then you will be given what's called a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot looks exactly the same as a regular ballot. You fill it out exactly the same and mark all of your preferences, but it is not counted. It is put in a separate envelope and held, and then you have 6 days after the election to go to your clerk's office in person and fix whatever the problem is. So if you didn't have your ID, you have 6 days to go to your clerk and prove your identity. And only after you do that will they pull out your provisional ballot and count it. This also creates criminal penalties for election workers who don't comply. It is unclear whether these penalties are for election workers who purposely do not comply, or also if it includes penalties for people who accidentally don't comply. But it will create penalties for election workers. Another thing it does is it allows any citizen to challenge somebody else's right to vote. So I can go to the election worker and I can say, I don't think Shannon has the right to vote. I think that she just doesn't really live in Michigan. She's not a citizen. She moved here from another state last week. I don't think she really has the right to vote. And you can challenge, any citizen can challenge this. And then it would be up to Shannon to have to go and prove that she, in fact, does have the right to vote. This creates a system for the Secretary of State to purge the voter rolls. So there is already a system for the Secretary of State to purge the voter rolls, but this codifies it into law. And people who have been purged for whatever reason will have to then re-register with their documentary proof of citizenship. This proposal mandates that the state has to pay for documents for people who have a demonstrated hardship. It does not define what a hardship is or what it will exactly pay for. So, for example, if I have to take a day off of work and I have lost wages, or maybe I have to pay for the bus, or maybe I have to pay for a babysitter. It isn't paying for those things. And we don't know what hardship is, but there is an avenue where people will get free ID. And when you see people circulating, when I've been seeing people circulating, this is the main thing I'm hearing them say. This is a proposal that will allow you to get a free ID. That's usually what I hear circulators say.
I'm going to jump in real quick, Nomi, because I
Yes.
also don't think that it mentions how it will be paid for by the government to actually give that service out to folks. That would, some of the stuff that is left kind of in limbo or not super defined, those things would be left up to the legislature
Yeah.
later to identify what that looks like in practice. So that could potentially change based on who's in office at any given time. And that can cause some voter confusion and stuff like that as well.
So this would also require two separate voter rolls. So there would be a voter roll for people who could vote in the federal elections, which does not require the DPAC. So basically, anybody who is currently eligible to vote but doesn't have the documents to prove their citizenship would still be able to vote in federal elections. And then there'd be a separate voter roll for people who could also vote in the state and local elections, and that would be require DPAC. So when you would go to vote, if you don't have DPAC, you would have one ballot. If you do have DPAC, then you would have a different ballot. So before I talk about the implication, well, actually, I'll go through this one last slide and then I'll stop for questions because that's a lot of information. So currently, approximately 10% of eligible voters do not have the necessary documents. This will disproportionately impact people who are low income, married, trans, college students, disabled, elderly, formerly incarcerated, anybody who's going to have trouble either affording the documents, that don't have the documents or have some barrier. I should have also put in here who are adopted are also disproportionately impacted. The
Whoa.
license, this because especially if you're adopted from out of state or from another country, then it's much more difficult to get those documents. The license, state ID, and real ID are not sufficient. You will have to register in person. It eliminates the option of signing the affidavit of identity. This will definitely create more additional cost to municipalities and to states to run the elections, and it could potentially disenfranchise tens of thousands of eligible Michigan citizens. What's important to know is that this adds red tape to the process of voting, a lot of red tape. So supporters say this is going to increase election security and it's going to guarantee that non-citizens can't vote. And it also will create a possible avenue for people to get free ID. And opponents say this will add red tape to the voting process, create obstacles to voting, and will disenfranchise tens of thousands of eligible Michigan citizens. So before I go to my final slide about this, let me pause and see if there are any questions.
I see three questions in the chat box, so I'm going to start with those. Anybody who wants to say their question out loud, feel free to chime in. Tony asked, what about the SAFE Act efforts?
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So it's SAVE, SAVE. That's a federal effort. This is essentially the state version of the SAVE Act. So if the SAVE Act passes, then all of these things that I said will be true for the whole, or maybe not exactly. The SAVE Act is not exactly the same as this, but it's very, very similar. If the SAVE Act passes federally, then there will not be two voting rolls. There will be one voting roll, and you will need to have documentary proof of citizenship in order to vote in any election. Um, I I know they've been talking about it a lot. I don't really know what the chances of it passing are. I'm get at this point. I don't think it has a very good chance of passing in federally.
Yeah, I will say there were executive orders from the federal level around this. There were multiple pieces of legislation, one in the Senate, one in the House, federally around this. Then we had legislation in Michigan around this that didn't end up moving forward, plus the ballot measures. Every single one of these has a different language.
Right.
Um, and impacts at a different level. So what we're focusing on today is specifically the voter initiated ballot campaigns that are actively collecting signatures right now.
Yeah.
Um, Next question from Simone. So, in effect, anyone who has changed their name, an adopted person, a woman who took her husband's last name, or a person who legally changed their name will have to have a current passport, correct?
No, if you don't have a current passport, then you need three things. You need your birth certificate, you need a photo ID, a valid current photo ID, and you need some kind of documentation to prove your legal name change.
Yeah.
So you don't need the passport, but you would need either those three things or a passport.
Yes. And then Tony asked, what if an adopted person has a passport? Do they need anything else? I think you probably just
No,
answered that
if you
question.
have a passport, you won't need anything else.
Perfect. And I do see Simone. I am sure if this does somehow get enough signatures and pass by voters in November, I'm sure there will probably be some legal challenges to it based on what you put in the chat box. And Brian asked, who writes the 100-word summary on the front of the petition?
That is an excellent question. And there is an incredibly political back and forth going on about it. What happens is that first, the director of elections writes one, the campaign submits one. Well, first, the campaign submits one. And then the director of elections kind of reworks it, and then it is argued about, every single comma is argued about in front of the Board of State Canvassers, and ultimately the Board of State Canvassers votes on it. In my personal opinion, sometimes they do a great job, and the 100-word summary really accurately describes what it does. And other times I think it's confusing and misleading. The 100-word summary is not supposed to say whether or not it's a good proposal. It's supposed to give an accurate and fair reflection of what the proposal does.
Yes.
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they're great, and sometimes they're not as great.
And I will say that campaigns are not required to go through the Board of State Canvassers process before collecting signatures and
Uh-oh.
getting their 100-word summary approved.
Murder
But
were
most
killed in the master
campaigns,
bedroom of their
oh, I'm gonna
Brentwood
mute you
mansion.
here. But most campaigns do that because it is something that if it gets approved by the Board of
Oh, the
State
chair.
Canvassers, that they cannot, sorry, I'm muting folks. If it does get approved by the Board of State Canvassers, it can't be challenged legally later on the summary itself.
Right.
So they don't have to do it, but most campaigns opt to do that.
Mhm.
So I am always asked, where is the money coming from? So I have a slide like this for every proposal explaining where the money comes from. So nearly all of the funding for Americans for Citizens Voting is coming from two individual people, which is Richard and Elizabeth Uline. They are the founders of Uline Industries. You probably see their ads popping up all over the internet. They are major donors to the Republican Party, the Conservative Partnership Foundation, and the Center for Security Policy. They are major funders in the effort, were major funders in the effort to overturn the 2020 election,
Oh,
including funding the January 6th events. So this is where, in fact, this is probably the first time I've seen a proposal where, about 90 or 95% of the money is coming from two individual people, this couple, the Ulines.
Now, Nomi, I know we had a couple more questions in the chat box. Do we want to hold those
Yeah,
towards the
no,
end?
go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I know there were a couple people who unmuted. Did you guys have questions you wanted to verbalize? No.
uh,
Um, Go ahead.
oh, I asked a question. What if on a ballot there is both uh, state candidates and also federal candidates?
Right. So, okay. So this is going back to that you would need two voter rolls.
Yes.
So you would have two different ballots. So if you don't have Deepak, if you don't have any, and the SAVE Act doesn't pass and you don't have proof of citizenship, you'll be handed a ballot and you'll be able to vote for like the president, for your congressperson, and for your senator. And then there'd be another ballot that would have your state representatives, your state senator, the Michigan Supreme Court, the university regents, your school board, everything else.
For that one, the state candidates, then you would have to have your DPOC
State and
For
local.
right,
proof.
for your state, yes. So like to vote for the governor, for your state rep, all of those you would need to have DPAC. The only ones you wouldn't need to have it for would be president, your US congressperson, and your US senator.
Right.
That's
Okay.
if the SAVE Act doesn't pass.
What a mess for the clerks.
Yes.
Um, it will change things. Any other questions?
I see one more from Natalie. Doesn't a birth certificate prove citizenship? If it shows your state and country of birth,
If
shouldn't that prove your birthright citizenship?
if you have your birth certificate and also a photo ID that has the same name that's on your birth certificate, then you need those two things. If your name has changed, then you also need to have either a passport or you need to have also proof of your name change.
So the difference, your birth certificate doesn't have a picture of you on it, right? And so where your passport has your picture and other identifying
Right.
information, Your birth certificate doesn't. It only shows that you are technically a citizen, but it doesn't prove your identity visually. So that's why you would kind of need to pair them up there.
Any other questions?
I have another one. Uh,
Okay.
this is just hearsay, but I had heard that every state where this has been introduced, it's passed. I mean, because people, they, so many people sign it thinking, oh golly, it's a free handout. They can get, um, people who can't afford it will get some money to get their ID, blah, blah, blah. And I think that the hook is saying that this is going to protect, our voting, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I guess the person who said this, whether it's true or not, is that people fall for it and they vote for it.
So, and that's why it's important for everybody to, try and help educate your friends about it as well.
And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
going to
but
the
move
is it
on.
true that every state has passed it? Or that's,
I think that is true, but I am not positive, so I'm not going to go on record saying because I'm not
I
positive.
believe right now it's only active in 2 states, if I remember correctly, and I could also be misspeaking. I'm fairly certain Arizona is one of them, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my
Kansas.
head. Thank you. And so,
Kansas stopped enforcing it because when Kansas enforced it, it disenfranchised 13,000 eligible voters and they stopped enforcing it. But I am going to move on because otherwise I'm worried that I will not get through. And I'm happy to stay on at the end for anybody who wants to stay longer to ask more questions.
right.
yeah.
But I won't spend as much time on any of the other ones. That's the one that is the most complicated. So
Uh-huh.
the next one is ranked choice voting. This is a constitutional amendment that will change the voting system so that instead of just voting for one person or another person, you rank your candidates by preference. And then if your first candidate doesn't have a majority means 50% plus one vote, then your vote is counted for your second choice, etc. It's referred to as an instant runoff election. This does not apply to every office. It only applies to president, Congress, US senator, governor, Michigan Attorney General, and Michigan Secretary of State. It does not play in with any other races except for those that I just mentioned. However, it does allow for municipalities to implement ranked choice voting. So, for example, like Ferndale and Ann Arbor have already passed laws that they want ranked choice voting in their municipality. They haven't been able to implement it because it's against the state law. So, this would also make it so that your city could implement it. It also moves up the primary from from August to June, so it pushes it up a little. That doesn't change the presidential primary. In addition to being able to rank your candidates, you instead can also rank your parties because remember, in Michigan, we have the constitutional right to straight party voting. So you still could do that. You could go in and say, like, the Green Party's my first choice, the Republican Party's my second choice, the Socialist Party's my third choice. And so if you want to do it that way, instead of ranking individual candidates, you can do that too. This little simplified graph comes directly from the website from Ranked Choice Voting. And I hope there are some Star Wars fans out there. This all uses Star Wars imagery. Now, obviously, in a real election, it would be much more complicated than this because there could be more candidates. This also makes the assumption that you're either for the Force or you're for the Empire. And that if you are for the Force, then other Force candidates are going to be your next choice. So in the first example, we have Luke Skywalker. He has 60% of the vote and he wins. But then we see that Princess Leia decides she wants to jump in the race too. So the two of them have split the vote for the Force. And even though Darth Vader only received 40% of the vote, Darth Vader becomes our next president. But with ranked choice voting, and again, this is making the assumption that if you voted for Luke, then Leia will be your second choice. So here, Luke got the least number of votes, so all of his votes are recalculated to people's second choice. In this case, all of them have chosen Princess Leia, and now she gets 60% of the vote, and she becomes the next president. So this is, like a very simplified version of how it would work because, as I said, there could be a dozen candidates, not just three. So supporters of this say that this will allow you to vote for your preferred candidate without worrying about whether or not you're, quote, wasting your vote. And it will result in electing a candidate who might not be your first choice, but it is at least an acceptable choice to the majority of voters. Opponents say this is confusing. It can also increase ballot fatigue, which is when people just drop off and stop voting, halfway through their ballot. And there are people who are worried about transparency, where like when you go to bed on election night, it looks like one person got the most votes, but then a couple days later, after they've recalculated, they didn't really win, and people worry whether or not there will be a lack of transparency. So most of the money from this is coming from small dollar donations. The campaign is mostly run by volunteers and in-kind donations. They had one large donor of $100,000, which, just to put it into perspective, like the U-Lines donated many millions of dollars. So $100,000 donation for a campaign of this size I mean, it's still obviously a big donation, but the vast majority of their money is coming from very small donations. Are there any questions about Rank My Vote? Okay. Next one is Michigan for Money Out of Politics. You'll hear this go by a lot of different names. You might hear it be My Mop or Mop Up Michigan or Mop Michigan. If you hear MOP, then that stands for Money Out of Politics. So this would ban the state's utility companies and any corporation that holds a government contract worth more than $250,000 from contributing to candidates' campaigns or PACs. And it would also ban any corporation for getting a contract within 18 months of making a contribution. There is language in here. Let's say I have a huge let's say I have a huge company and I'm trying to get a contract with the state of Michigan. And I made a donation to, Elvis for president. And before I realized that my company was going to be, a possible contender for a contract, I can go to Elvis and say, you need to give me the money back. And after Elvis returns my donation, then I will be eligible to apply for this contract. This ban extends to corporate offices, board members, and they're defining immediate family as spouses and dependent children. So let's say my husband has a huge contract with the state. That means I also am not able to donate money. It's limited to the jurisdiction of the contract. So, for example, let's say my company has a contract with Pontiac. I can still donate money to a Southfield candidate, but I can't donate money to a Pontiac candidate. So it also mandates that groups running political ads would have to disclose their donors. So supporters say this would help get dark money out of politics and increase transparency. I don't think there are any supporters who would say that this will get all dark money out of politics. I think that the organizers of this campaign will tell you this will help get dark money out of politics, and that it will help lessen corporate interests in government, especially from utility companies. Opponents say they really liken it to the unions, and they say that companies have a right and also an obligation to advocate for the best interests, their own best interests. PACs help employees collectively use their voice, like unions, by voluntarily contributing. And they point out that the PACs do not come from fees that customers are paying, that they are coming from voluntary contributions from employees. So, where is the money coming from with this? Most of the money is coming from donor advised funds and from small dollar donations and in kind donations. Mop Up Michigan is supported by Voters Not Politicians, Clean Water Action, the Hip Hop Caucus, and Michigan United Action. These aren't the only organizations that are supporting them, but these are some of the main ones. So, are there any questions about Mop Up Michigan?
Chat.
Okay, moving on to tax reform. Ax My Tax. This would eliminate all property tax in Michigan, business and residential. And when I mean all property tax, I mean literally every penny of property tax would be eliminated, including millages. And this includes millages that have already passed that are already in effect. So, for example, I personally pay a millage that helps to pay for the DIA. I pay a millage that goes to support the Detroit Zoo, and I pay a millage that goes to my local library. Those are ones that I, that have been passed in my county and in my municipality. It would stop all of those. It would reallocate money from other Michigan taxes, especially from sales tax and from marijuana tax. But to be clear, it would significantly shrink the budget by at least $22 billion. It would also make it very difficult for any future taxes to be implemented. Any future taxes would require 60% voter approval on a ballot initiative. Right now, all the ballot initiatives need are a majority and a plurality in order to pass. This would require 60% voter approval or two-thirds majority in the legislature. So I don't even know if two-thirds of the legislature can agree on what day of the week it is. So I think it's fair to say that if this passes, it would make it nearly impossible to implement any new tax or to increase taxes. So currently, about 12.7% of the school aid fund comes from state property tax. So it would shrink the budget. Now, I will say that if you ask somebody who is supporting Ask My Tax, they will tell you that this will lower your housing costs and that even if you're a renter, it might lower your housing costs because your landlord could pass their savings on to you. They're not legally obligated to, but they might pass the savings on to you. But they are also pointing out that if you're saving money, let's say you're saving $3,000 on your property taxes, that then if you go and spend all of that money, then you're going to be paying more sales tax. So they're saying it's not really going to shrink the budget by as much as this because it will increase the money collected by sales tax. But remember that sales tax is 6%. And so even if you spent every penny that you saved by not paying property tax, you're still only going to pay 6% of that to sales tax. So supporters say, and everything in the pink box comes directly from the X My Tax website, that this would be true property ownership. They say there are other ways that we can fund these things. And the other point they make is that property tax is the only tax that we have where people fear losing something that they already own if they don't pay it. So, for example, maybe you maybe you have been paying your mortgage for years. Maybe you don't even have a mortgage anymore. Maybe you inherited your house from your grandmother and you don't have any mortgage on it. But if you don't pay your property tax, then the government can still come and take your house. The property tax is the only kind of thing that's like that. Opponents say that this would cut at least $22 billion in funding for schools, roads, recreation, and public safety. Some people feel that this would defund public education completely. It definitely would result in massive funding cuts to it. the proposed reallocation of other taxes will only make up a small percentage of this lost funding, and it would make it very difficult, nearly impossible, to increase taxes in the future. So, where's the money coming from? This is also largely funded by small dollar donations. Their most major funder is a farm called Rice Lakes Farms. It's just a private farm. This was founded by Carla Wagner, who is currently running for Michigan governor in the Republican primary. Are there any questions about Axe My Tax?
Republicans are always against taxes.
Well, I would say that this is a true libertarian bill.
Ah,
I would say it's more of a libertarian bill than a Republican bill. If you're somebody who really believes it does not support taxation, this is a great bill.
I see Brian has a question in the chat. It says, so out of state owners of vacation property in Michigan would essentially have a windfall.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Good point.
because they
Any
don't.
questions?
I'll tell you that other communities that are really worried about it are vacation communities, because in Michigan, if you own two, let's say I own my home here and I also, own a house in, up north, a vacation home up north, then I'm paying on both of those. I'm paying a different rate on my primary homestead than on my secondary homestead. And I'm paying a higher rate on my secondary homestead. And so vacation communities, like a lot of rural areas in northern Michigan, especially, but also on both of the coasts of Michigan, are very much reliant on that. Any other questions?
I don't see any questions, just some comments in the chat for anyone who wants to read them.
Okay. Invest in my kids. This is also a tax reform. This is also a constitutional amendment. This would impose a, quote, fair share surcharge on any annual taxable income of more than $1 million for joint returns, or $500,000 for individual returns, for a 5% surcharge. So just to be clear, let's just pretend that my husband and I make $1,001 a year in taxable income. We would pay the extra 5% on $1. So you're paying the extra 5% on what is above this limit. And the money collected would go directly to the school aid fund. And it requires that this money be spent only to support classrooms in local school districts, including funding for career and technical education, attracting and retaining high quality educators, and reducing class size. This would prohibit the use of money for any other purpose and would have subject to audits. So supporters say this is going to allow us to lower our class sizes, retain and recruit more teachers, improve facilities, improve academic achievement, and it would add approximately $1.7 billion to the school aid fund. Opponents say that the term fair share surcharge is misleading. It should be called a new tax. It should not be called a surcharge. There's a fear that this could hurt businesses and economic investment, and that it would give an unfair advantage to public schools. Opponents also claim that poor achievement in Michigan is not due to lack of funding, and that even with more funding, it would not improve academic achievement. Now, you know how statistics work. I'm sure you can find statistics to prove either point. So I'm not going to state what the truth is, but this is what supporters and opponents say. Where's the money coming from? So this also is coming mostly from small dollar donations from donor advised funds. This lists a bunch of organizations, and I'm not going to read them all out, but you can read them and see that these are the organizations that are supporting invest in my kids either with money or with in-kind donations. Are there any questions about invest in my kids?
Doesn't affect me.
Okay, other
Like
proposal.
I have one real
Yes.
quick. So just like the lottery, the Michigan lottery, which was passed into law giving 100% to education, then was changed to funnel the cash into the general fund, correct?
Yes.
Except this would be a constitutional amendment.
Okay,
So
so this is a question I get a lot. First of all, this would be the only constitutionally protected money for the school aid fund. So the question I get a lot is what happens, what stops the legislature from then just taking money away from the school aid fund and be like, oh, well, they don't need it because they're getting this pop from the Invest in My Kids tax surcharge. So we'll just decrease the amount that we're putting in there. Nothing stops the Michigan legislature from doing that. So it does not guarantee that this is actually going to grow the school state aid fund, but it will be the only money for the school aid fund that is constitutionally protected.
so they would not be able to transfer that money like they did with the lottery money.
No, but if they have in the budget, they can say, okay, we're going to take $1.7 billion out of the budget for schools because they're getting it from this tax, which would then end up meaning the school aid fund would end up having the same amount of money.
Yeah.
So that they could do that. But the money that's collected for this surcharge has to go, is constitutionally protected to go to the school aid fund. I also want to say this does not advantage wealthier districts versus poorer districts because I get that question a lot too. Doesn't this help the wealthier districts more because they're going to have more of these millionaires? No, because the money will go into the state school aid fund, not into the local school district. Any other questions? Okay, other proposals. So this is also a really confusing one. So I'm going to try and dissect this.
I
This would
just
be,
want to flag time real quick. It is 6:58, so we are going to run a little bit long for everybody. And we are recording this if you have to hop.
okay, I'll try and go faster.
Sorry.
Okay, so this is the voters to stop pay cuts. This is a referendum that would repeal a law, and the net effect of that would be ending the sub-minimum wage. The sub-minimum wage is, people usually think about it as being for tipped workers, where you get less than the minimum wage, and the idea is that your tips make up the difference. So I'm going to give you a little brief history about this. In 2018, One Fair Wage submitted signatures for a ballot proposal that was going to increase the minimum wage and phase out the sub-minimum wage. The legislature knew this was going to pass, and they didn't want it. It was a Republican trifecta. They didn't want it to pass. So they adopted the proposal and then they immediately amended it and gutted the meaning. And since that moment, it's been working its way through the court system until it finally reached the Michigan Supreme Court, who decided that it was unconstitutional to adopt and amend. So they reinstated the original law calling for the gradual increase of the minimum wage and the phasing out of the sub-minimum wage. Then the Michigan legislature said, no, no, we do not want that. We want to maintain the sub-minimum wage. And they passed a law that increased the sub-minimum wage. It had been 30%. Now it's 50% of the regular wage, but it kept the sub-minimum wage. And now there's a ballot proposal to get rid of that law that was passed in 2025 and reinstate the law that was adopted in 2019. So right now, tipped workers the sub-minimum wage will eventually raise up until it's $7.50 an hour, and the minimum wage will be $15 an hour. So it will happen gradually. If the referendum passes, then by 2031, there will be no sub-minimum wage, and for everybody, whether they're tipped or not tipped, and you can keep your tips on top of your wage, will be $15 an hour. So supporters say this would honor the voters' original intention before the legislature interfered, and that in states that that have done this, where there are 8 states that have done this, that the restaurant industry hasn't suffered and servers made more money. Opponents say, especially people in the restaurant owners say that this is going to destroy their business. They'll have to raise their prices and customers will tip less and servers will end up making less overall. So there's two totally different predictions of what will happen if this passes. Um, so they have not yet filed their campaign finance report because they're just starting. They have not submitted, oh, no, they're already collecting language, but they're just starting. But they're getting a lot of their support from One Fair Wage and from Mothering Justice. Any questions? I can stay on later if anybody wants to delve deeper into any. So here, the rest of these that I'm going to talk about have not submitted language. So I don't have a lot of, I can't answer questions about details because the language is not finalized on them. Family leave, this would create up to 12 weeks of job protected paid leave. They were trying to get this through the legislature during the last lame duck session. It was called flock, but it wasn't able to make it through. The best analogy I have for this is it would create a system that's similar to unemployment insurance, where the employer pays part, the employee pays part, and the state manages a fund that would allow you up to 12 weeks of job protected paid leave. This is largely being spearheaded by a coalition that is led by Mothering Justice. Any questions on that one? And again, the language hasn't been submitted. Education. So this is so former Governor Snyder said that he is planning to spend about 25 or 30 million dollars on a proposal that will be aimed at improving third grade test scores. He doesn't know what it's going to include. It's not going to include raising any taxes. He said he's going to talk to stakeholders, including business leaders and teachers, and try and figure out how to improve third grade test scores. I think we would all like academic achievement to increase, but of course the devil is in the details, and we don't know what this is going to include. There's a lot of speculation that it's going to include something more about charter schools or vouchers, but we don't really know what it will include. So we are waiting with bated breath to see what Governor Snyder says. So Michigan marriage equality. We have an official position on this. We see marriage equality as a question of separation of religion and government, and we support the Michigan marriage equality proposal. This would be a constitutional amendment that would enshrine same-sex marriage into the Michigan Constitution. Currently, some of you might be surprised to learn that in the Michigan Constitution, same-sex marriage is banned. The only reason why we have same-sex marriage in Michigan is because of the 2015 Supreme Court ruling. We already know that the Supreme Court is eager to take a look at that decision. Justice Thomas has made it very clear that he feels that Obergefell was decided incorrectly, and he would like for the Supreme Court to take another look at it. There are a bunch of cases, test cases, that are trickling their way up to the Supreme Court, and we expect there is a very strong chance. I just did a interview with Attorney General Dana Nessel, who told me that there is a 100% chance that same-sex marriage will be overturned in the Supreme Court. If that happens, then first of all, I want to tell you, if you already are in a same-sex marriage, then your marriage is still going to be valid and protected. Also, if this passes, if the ban goes into place and you get married in another state where it is protected by their state constitution, then your marriage will still be recognized in Michigan at the moment, because there's a bill called I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but that basically all states have to recognize the marriages of other states. That law could also be overturned, and then and then you would only be married in the states where it's legal. So if it's overturned in at the federal level, it's already banned in Michigan. And so this is a proposal to try and enshrine same-sex marriage into the Michigan Constitution. Right now, this is in the phase of raising money. These campaigns cost between 25 and $50 million to run, and they are actively trying to raise money. If you're interested in hosting a fundraiser for them, then please get in touch with me and I would be happy to connect you with the campaign. There is also an effort in Michigan. There's been a proposal introduced in both the House and the Senate to put this on the ballot. If it passes by 2/3 majority in both houses, then it can go on the ballot and without needing to collect signatures. I don't know how likely that is. I can say it's highly unlikely to happen. Any questions about Michigan marriage equality before I move to the very last one? So the CONCON, which is the Constitutional Convention, this is not collecting signatures. This will be Proposition 1 in 2026. This is automatically on the ballot every 16 years. If it passes, then there'll be a statewide constitutional convention. And what will happen is that every legislative district will elect a delegate. Those delegates will convene a constitutional convention. There are almost no guidelines on what that entails. They could meet for an hour, they could meet for a decade, they can meet every day, they can meet once a year. There's no guidelines on them. The delegates who are elected will make all of the rules for the Constitutional Convention. They will have the option of saying this constitution is great, we're not changing anything, we can change 2 words of it, or we can throw the whole thing in the shredder and write it again from scratch. And after they're done with their process, they present the new constitution and voters will have the opportunity to approve or reject it. So our last constitutional convention was in the early 1960s. And since then, no one has ever campaigned for or against the CONCON. It automatically comes on your ballot and it has been overwhelmingly rejected every time. This is the first time that there's a concerted effort to get this to pass. Speaker of the House, Matt Hall, has already said that he would like for there to be a new constitutional convention. There are a lot of groups who are very unhappy about abortion rights being part of our Constitution and also other progressive changes like the redistricting commission and some of the voting rights. And they would like, instead of just trying to change the Constitution piecemeal, which is what we do now, they would like to have the whole Constitution have another look at. When this comes up, you can decide whether or not you would like to continue our process of amending the Constitution ballot proposal at a time, or whether you would like to elect delegates to take a look at the entire thing. Are there any questions about the CONCON? So the bottom line is, please know before you sign. Please make sure you fully understand the proposals before you sign any petition. And please feel free to contact me if you have any questions, if you have new information, if you want me to come and present to your organization, or you just want to call me and ask me about it. I will be sending out, Shannon has to give me your emails, and then I will be sending out a sheet. In fact, if you don't want me to do that, then tell Shannon not to give me your email address. Otherwise, I will be sending you a PDF with an overview of all of the ballot proposals.
Yes, and I do see one question in the chat. Is CONCON like Article 5 Constitutional Convention? It is similar, yeah, except the Article 5 Constitutional Convention, I believe, has more parameters around it than our state CONCON would. But it is similar in its impact, I suppose. It's just on the state level rather than the federal level.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Opening it up for additional questions. I know there was one in the chat about the the minimum wage one. Is that what you're raising your hand about, Simone?
Actually, I have sort of two questions.
Go
Go
ahead.
for it. I know that was your question to begin with, so go ahead.
Yeah. Before that is, I'm one of those people who's legally changed her name. However, I did so while I lived overseas. I am extremely concerned because I have changed my name legally because of two marriages, and then I changed my name legally by choice. Um, so I have, if someone wants to be obstructive, I have clear problems for them to choose to throw me out. I'm wondering if there's anything that you've heard of in the wording that says that they have to accept and acknowledge name changes from other countries.
So, do you have a US passport?
I do, but I cannot afford to renew that.
Mhm.
And it will expire this coming year.
Okay. So then what you will need to, if what you will need personally to vote, if this passes, is your birth certificate, your photo ID that has your current name, and whatever, and something, you don't have to document every name change, but you'll need the legal record of your most recent name change. So you will need all of those.
Yeah, and that's from New Zealand. So, I mean, so far I haven't had issues, but as this is clearly a policy to find ways to deny people votes,
Um,
I'm a little concerned.
yeah.
Um, just real quickly, I do want to acknowledge this was a lot of information. I'm seeing some comments about it in the chat. This is so much, and I will tell you there are even more ballot initiatives that we're considering doing stuff in this session. So this is a mass amount of information for all voters to have to know and understand. I did put a link in the chat box, michigan.gov/SOS/elections/BSC. That is the Board of State Canvassers website. So anybody who's gone through the Board of State Canvassers process with their ballot initiative, you can find that information plus their meeting minutes and links to their recorded meetings and stuff like that in there. I also shared a link in the chat box. The really long, awkward link is to a spreadsheet with the people who have gone through that process or the campaigns that have, and it also links you directly to their ballot initiative language. The 100-word summary has likely changed off of that, but their actual legal language of what would pass is the same in those. So, sorry, I wanted to interrupt with that before other people hopped off real quick. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I don't know.
That's
Well, this let me, oh, it did let me, okay, great. It let me put, a lot of people can't post a PDF in the chat. Try and click on the PDF and see if you get it. This will be an overview of all of them. If you want me to email it to you, like let's say you want to send it to other friends or you want to, whatever, then please, I'm more than happy to share. I want everybody to get the information about it. At some point, we will know which ones got enough signatures and are going on the ballot, and I will change this presentation to be an even deeper dive, but only into the ones that are actually on the ballot, which is not going to be, which will probably be like 3 of these.
D.org.
Then my second question was about the minimum wage
Uh-huh.
thing. And isn't there currently already a small business exemption around minimum wage, or am I hopelessly out of date?
There is not a no, you are
Back.
you are that is not accurate. There are exemptions about things like needing to provide healthcare benefits or sick leave and other kinds of things, but there's not which also those exemptions were changed in part. I'm not going to be knowledgeable enough to say the details, but the paid leave exemptions have changed somewhat, but minimum wage, no.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, then I thank you very much for your time. And like I said, really, I really do mean it that you can call me with any questions. It's almost always after I do one of these that, my inbox will be deluged with, oh yes, there was this one point I realized afterwards I had a question about. So really do feel free to contact me with any questions.
So I will be reaching out to everybody to follow up in the next couple of days. I'll also be sharing your contact information with Nomi. If you don't want me to do that, please let me know. I will respect your privacy there. Otherwise, I will send her information or your information to her so that she can get you additional information and you all can connect if you'd like as well. Great. Well, we appreciate you all for being here and staying an extra 17 minutes with us this evening. Happy holidays. Just so everybody knows, our organization is technically closed after Friday of this week through the new year. However, I mean, democracy doesn't stop, right? So we will be connected and we will be reaching out if anything major flares up that requires everybody to know about it. So just so you know, I'm probably not going to be responding to emails otherwise. We hope you all take care. Bye now.
Thank you.